Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We're here to discuss starting your own music festival in your Nebraska hometown. I'm joined by two music experts who are going to show us the ways here and really show us how this is possible, whether it's a concert every Friday night or, one large annual event. We're going to kind of dive in and talk about the music industry here. And we do have a lot of information, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to introduce our speakers today and have them share a little bit of their backgrounds. But I'll start here with Aaron. So Aaron is the operations director for the Bay here in Lincoln. The Bay has recently merged with Here Nebraska, a nonprofit music group that focuses on promoting Nebraska artists. Here Nebraska has now extended its reach and mission to go beyond state artistry. Aaron has agreed to join us this afternoon. And would you like just to start off by sharing some of your background and a little bit how you got into the industry?
Yeah, all the way back, I think in 2001, I started booking shows. I was still in high school. My bands and friends' bands, promoters weren't really willing, wanting to work with bad bands they'd never heard of before. Mm-hmm. And so, it was on us to, if we wanted to play these more legitimate venues, to act as the promoter. So, we'd pay the venue fee, we'd, control the door, we'd do all the marketing and stuff ourselves. And yeah, it was a really great learning experience. Eventually promoters did want to end up working with us, which was a real big blessing. It's definitely not ideal for bands to always be taking all that risk. So that was really nice. Book tours and stuff like that. In college, I cut my teeth as an audio engineer, learning the ropes at the Rococo Theater for a few years. And then later at the Slowdown, all while I was earning my degree at UNO. I have my degree in percussion performance and music technology. Right around the time I graduated, I transitioned over to the to a more manager's role at the Slowdown, running the bar and managing events at night, and that was really educational and been really helpful kind of throughout my career, working that side of it, which was really nice. At some point in there, I started working for a nonprofit music organization called Omaha Girls Rock. In brief, it's a summer camp for young girls, and I was the equipment manager, managing equipment for 10 bands. Definitely learned a lot of good organization skills. My first year, we had to source all that equipment from community members before they got a grant to purchase all their own equipment. So that was really interesting. Met a lot of people that way. 5 years ago, I worked as a professor of music technology at Iowa Western. Taught between the two semesters, maybe 6 or 7 different classes. Before I got hired at Here Nebraska as the program manager. Largely just running their events, developing new events, running their current ones, such as the Good Living Tour, here Grand Island, here Omaha, here Lincoln. There were some of the early ones. Later on, Lincoln Calling, which we ran for 2 years in the more recent future, and now here Nebraska, like you said earlier, has merged with the Bay. And so we're largely doing in-house shows, have been doing external events like Here Nebraska did for its more formative years. So yeah, that's kind of brings up to speed.
It's really exciting, just knowing that you had started out knowing that you wanted to be in this industry and then grown and gotten some experience in a lot of different roles and then watched your work grow over the years.
Absolutely,
that's really rewarding. So yeah, wonderful, thank you. And of course, now I want to introduce David Fudge. He drove all the way here from North Platte, so we owe him a big thank you. David Fudge is the Executive Director of NEBRASKAland Days. He has been with NEBRASKAland Days since 2005. He is involved with Nebraska's tourism industry and is currently the president of the Nebraska Travel Association. So David, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are now?
Well, like most of us in the industry, it's about music, and either you're talented enough to play music and want to do that, or you're not, and you go into the other side of the business, which is production. And so my background is in radio, and I got involved in producing some shows kind of early and involved with stage crews and that sort of thing as a volunteer. Produced a couple of shows out in Alliance, and then got involved in Nebraskaland days back in 2005, and it's just kind of become one of those things you just fall for. You get into the industry and you really enjoy it. There's parts of it you like, there's parts of it you don't, but it really is kind of rewarding to see your work come together at the end of the day, and in our case, put on a statewide festival with visitors from all over the country. So very rewarding to see it kind of come together, and kind of still a fun industry to be around.
Oh yeah, certainly working and just kind of finding yourself in that role that you didn't necessarily expect at the beginning, but that you love, and yeah, it's a great time.
Yeah.
So I want to start off just by asking some of the basic questions and really kind of getting to the point of why this is important. Why people should be thinking about having music in their communities and bringing in music festivals. So can you tell us why music is such a large influence on communities and how you've seen it make a positive difference?
Yeah. I think darn near everyone likes music. And a lot of people like a lot of different kinds of music. I think it's a great way to bring people together, especially people within a community. You know, on a smaller level and more personally, I think I really found my community when I really started playing music and kind of getting involved in a local music scene when I was growing up in Omaha. And we've definitely heard that story a lot, especially as we travel around the state. You know, I guess I played sports, I played in the band, and I just didn't really connect with people who I met in those through those activities. And yeah, it was when I started playing in bands that I feel like I really got connected. And I think recognizing that is that's likely going to be true kind of everywhere you go. There are going to be those people who just don't really feel like they're able to kind of connect with you know, the more prominent things that are available. And so you know, music is definitely a really great way for some kids to really kind of connect and find their communities. Yeah.
I think to build on that, it's one of the few things that still gets us out of our shells a little bit, right? So our lives have become a bit more of a silo in each our own way, but music has a way of drawing us out of those silos, and we're around each other. And we get to enjoy that in a live experience. There's still nothing like live music that's available anywhere. You can listen to it all day on a device in your office or wherever you're listening to it. But to hear it played at a high level in a live venue is just still, I think, a special experience for people in general. So it does have a way of drawing people together that the other forms of entertainment don't.
Yeah, I feel like there is a lot of emotion in that, and especially building a community and connectivity through that. It's really inclusive for people who have that outlet, so I agree with that. And outside of your roles, I mean, what opportunities do you see for the state in terms of music and festivals? Do you think that Nebraska has possibilities to grow in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, besides, you know, I think bringing people together, allowing people to find a community and a passion. You know, I think there's an important attraction and retention argument for more music-related events and activities. Certainly, I think there's a benefit to local economies, especially if you're talking about something on a level that is going to be attracting people from neighboring communities or even neighboring states. And then I think just supporting local is big, and I think it gives us the opportunity to do that.
I think it's really what scale are you talking about? Because I think there is an economy of scale when you get to a large production where if you look on what's going on regionally, there's certainly a point where I'm concerned that we're hitting a bit of point of saturation on some genres of music. I think where there's room for growth is in local community-driven functions where you're utilizing talent from within your state that doesn't force you to stick your neck out in a way budgetarily that can be detrimental to your community. So I agree there's some room for growth in that market as long as it's in a way that I think is responsible to yourself in terms of the organization producing the show, because it's really easy to go upside down on one of these things. I mean, it can happen very, very quickly.
There's a lot of risk, absolutely.
Yeah.
As long as it's approached the right way.
Yeah.
And I think now, more than ever too, local and community support is very, very strong
Yeah.
in this state. It
Yeah.
always has been, but very much so now that people are wanting to see this.
Mhm.
So, and with that being said, with a lot of risks and the possibility of it turning upside down, I think it's important to talk about a lot of the obstacles that planners will face in this planning stages. And what's your advice in coming over those challenges and obstacles?
I think setting realistic expectations and definitely managing your risks. Especially if this is a new thing. I mean, if you try and go big, your first time at it, there's those risks are compounded, and so, yeah.
We see a lot, in our world, we see a lot of new festivals try and start up, and I'm talking on the macro level. They're going after A-list headliners, and they plan on losing massive amounts of money in their first 5 years of business plan. And so there is a thought there with some promoters, like go big or go home, but I think there's something to be said for scaling, starting managing your expectations. What do we think is realistic in years 1 through 3, and having that thought and having that discussion out loud with a group of people who are bound together to work for a common goal of building something in your community. So managing expectations is probably the first thing. Some of the other risks to consider, I think we've seen plenty of examples of Mother Nature getting involved with events regionally. It happened in Topeka this year with what has been renamed Stampede. It had an impact on what we did this year, and I think you've certainly seen it impact some other smaller activities throughout the state. So there's a lot of, when you're planning these things, especially out in our part of the world, we don't have the indoor venues that you would find here in our part of the world. So, weather management, budget, community support, managing expectations, all those sorts of things I think are boxes you've got to check before you go into one of these deals.
And I do think sometimes people believe that they have to have those A headliners, the A-list headliners, when they don't necessarily have to have those to have a great music festival. By finding local artists, you can have a wonderful, wonderful show, and just kind of reeling that in and setting those goals ahead of time to help. And so talking about those challenges, another big thing that's scary to planners is going through change. And change can be difficult for anybody. So I think it's important to talk about change within the music industry because it happens quite frequently. So what are some of the changes that you've seen within the last 5 years? And do you see any big changes within the next 5 to 10?
I think technology is always going to be advancing, changing, in the last 5 to 10 years. That's definitely changed a lot. I think it's been really wonderful at how accessible it's made, like putting on a small music event. 10 years ago, it wasn't necessarily the most affordable thing to own a digital board, and now it's relatively easy. It's relatively inexpensive. Before you would need an analog board and a ton of outboard gear to really, I think a lot of investment in like speakers and monitors and stuff like that, cables, whatever, and now you kind of have like your whole front of house, your effects and everything like that in a digital board, and you can get your feed from the stage off of one Cat 5 or Cat 6 line, and it really makes it easy. So I think that's one big thing, and one thing I'm sure we will see more big advancements in the future. Marketing is another one. Marketing and promotion, that's definitely changed a lot and will certainly continue to change.
Yeah, and in our world, it's been entirely budgetary. Like, what we were able to purchase acts for 5 to 8 years ago, the inflation in that number has really advanced rapidly. And has a lot to do with the nature of the recording industry, because if you think about the way we used to consume music, we'd go buy a record. I'm really dating myself now, I apologize, but you'd go buy a record and you'd own the entire body of work, and the artist would receive some benefit from that. Well, the way we consumers now consume music, you're not buying that body of work. You might be buying one track out of that body of work, or you might just be streaming as part of a larger body of work that includes a number of different artists. So the explosion in ticket prices at festival or building levels is largely due to the fact that the business model has changed from my money used to come from recording, and now it comes from touring. And touring is very expensive for major national level acts, and so that's been the largest change in our world over the past 5 years, and it'll be interesting see how that plays out over the next 5 to 10 years.
And I do think that is part of the exciting part of the music industry, because it is constantly changing, and just being out there and being aware of that and what exists and what resources are there, I think it is progressing in a lot of good ways, and that many people can take advantage of it. So really, really fun things. And so now that we've kind of discussed, the importance of it, and that we're beginning to imagine this, we should probably start talking about, the planning process. Where do people dive in? Because it can be really overwhelming when you want to start but don't know where. So I guess that's exactly where we start. How do you begin to plan this, and what are some of the most important considerations when you're starting?
There's a lot there to unpack there. I think with a lot of these, it's the first words I'm probably going to say is it depends, and so I think asking yourself what's the impetus for wanting to actually host this event. Was it you were sitting in a park and you're like, oh, we should have a concert here for the community. So you already have your location, you know where you want it to be. There's a general size, you can only fit so many people in that park, and you can start kind of pretty much building off of that. And for another one, I don't know, you have a number of different examples of maybe start with certain elements and you can kind of build off of them. I think in general, thinking about who is your concert for, who do you want to show up. How many people do you want to be able to show up, or how many people can you actually fit in your space that you have? Where do you want to have it? I think just a lot of different kind of considerations that really affect one another. And once you kind of have some of those elements worked out, maybe thinking about your budget, or maybe you already have a budget. We have $5,000 to host a music event. Like, where do we want to have it? Who do we want to come? Stuff like that. And so. I think probably budget, location, audience are maybe the three big things, and making sure you have plenty of time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And finding resources to help you if you're not familiar. Reach out to somebody who's been in the industry for a while, because there's no sense in reinventing the wheel on this stuff. There's people in the business that have done this that have a lot of the answers. And with any event, the devil's always in the details. People forget that it's important to have some security. Are you going to sell alcohol? Are you going to, do you need licensing? Do you need, on and on and on. There's a whole list of check boxes that you've got to make sure are done before you get down to day of show, that to really allowing yourself as much time as possible is really the key here. Because if you wake up one morning and say, I want to do a concert 45 days from now, the odds of that getting all pulled together are probably pretty slim. If you start thinking a year in advance, now you're much more likely to get all the boxes checked, have time to reach out to resources to help you get to that point, and really put on a first-rate show that you're proud of, and B, is successful.
Yeah, even stuff is like, where are people going to go to the bathroom? Yep. Where are they going to get water? Get overlooked a lot.
Yeah, I do see the importance, asking first the core questions, but then really getting into the details, because if those things are overlooked, then it's No one's going to have as great of a time as they could. And there are a lot of important considerations. And I know you brought up special permits, and that's something that I want to ask you both on, because a lot of people aren't aware of some of the permits that you need to get in advance. So I'm hoping that you can talk about what permits people need to be thinking about getting, how do they obtain them, and kind of the process for that.
Well, the big obvious one is liquor, and that's the one that takes the longest. If you're going to have an event where you want to be able to sell at an event, that takes the longest amount of time to get accomplished, because there's several regulatory hurdles you've got to jump through to get to that. And my advice to people is always contact an attorney. Those are the people who know the process, can help advance the ball in that way and get it done in a timely fashion. Because I've seen restaurants and bars that get hung up in that process because they were trying to do it on their own. I'm sure you've seen the same thing. And so the other considerations really are, what do your local ordinances call for? And those can be different from community to community. What's the curfew? Is there a local curfew? Is there a noise regulation you've got to overcome? So there's a broad base, that's a really broad-based question, and to go back here, it depends on what you want to do, where you want to go, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, our experience, if it's in a smaller community, calling or visiting the city clerk, they've always been extremely helpful in knowing exactly, here's what you need, here's your applications, get it to us by this time, all that stuff. That's been really helpful. Even like in Lincoln, and Omaha, you need a permit to even just put up a tent at your event. There's it can kind of get down into some nitty gritty details that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Food. We were hosting an event in Grand Island, and it was written up in the paper, and we had some food trucks, and the health inspector for Grand Island called us a week before the event, saying that he read that, he or she read that there was food trucks at the event, but he hadn't received any applications or permit requests, and so so the vendors hadn't done that, and so we had to reach out to them and let them know that they needed to do that. It can, there's a lot to unpack there, so yeah.
Yeah, it does go really into the details, and I know it's hard to answer because it depends, but it's good just to talk about them and at least know what kind of exists. I know in the past they've even had, for how much electricity you're going to use, or sound, so there are a lot of...
If it's on public land or private land,
yeah, and tents, and so it really kind of gets into the details there, but just like you both said, having enough time so you're not rushed on getting these by a certain date, because it does take longer to get some of these permits approved and processed. So
and I think working on the relationships with local government, talking with them, and definitely playing ball with them. Having the mindset you want to be their friend, and you want them to be your friend. That's
Well, and on top of that, our city administrators in North Platte understand the importance of what goes on during the 11 days of our festival. I would bet if you took the time to carve out and talk to those folks well ahead of time and told them what your goals were, you wouldn't encounter too much resistance. They'd probably help you through the process, because they frankly want your event to be successful, because it's their best interest from a sales tax and lodging tax point of view if you're trying to do a big event and bring people to town. So again, time, making sure you're talking to people who control those processes is the best advice I can hope to leave anybody with today.
Yeah, no, I definitely think relationships is how things get done, especially working together, because that would be huge for everyone in the community to be able to offer that. And so now that we've talked about getting the permits, I'm curious, has there been an instance where maybe you didn't get a permit in time, or where your planning has kind of derailed a little bit? What happened, and what did that look like? How did you get everything back on track?
We were out in the community, and we had instead of bringing our own stage to the community, we got one locally, and we arrived and it was set up, and it was, I don't know, maybe 2 feet off the ground, and I mean, long story short, incredibly unstable. There was just like kind of sticks. There were no cross supports. It 100% would have fallen over after once the band started playing, and that was that was a bit chaotic. Luckily, the company was eager to correct the mistake. We went to the hardware store, got some lumber, and we all chipped in and made some support, some cross supports for it, and it worked out. Another one at Lincoln Calling, our headliner for the first year, Charles Bradley, got a really devastating cancer diagnosis a week before the actual festival, and he was canceling all of his dates and immediately going in for treatment, and that was pretty stressful, finding a replacement, and he had promised, if he survives, he wants to come back, and so the second year he had overcome his cancer, and we booked him again. And about a month before the festival, he actually passed away. So we experienced it twice with that, and it was definitely rough overcoming that. But I think having backup plans in place, kind of exploring what if scenarios is always really helpful. Hoping for the best, planning for the worst. Yeah.
Great, and yeah, we do the same thing in our world, right? So same kind of horror story with headliners that book, and then life changes happen, right? The one year we had Lady Antebellum, just as and Hillary announced she was pregnant in December. We'd been on sale for 3 or 4 months, and so we managed to find a replacement act, but then you go through a whole refund and exchange process, which is really kind of chaotic. Had another band that we booked and we'd been on sale. The label decided to send them to Europe in the middle of the summer and change their plans on us. So that sort of stuff happens. Again, prepare for the worst, but hope everything works out, and always have a plan, always have resources. The key in a lot of these cases is people who are willing to step in, and volunteers,
relationships,
staff, yeah, absolutely. So if it can go, it's like Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong at some point in one of these deals, and it's just how you respond to that as opposed to the actual event.
And that's tough too, because it's a balancing act on both sides. Of course, you want to, you want to work well with the artist and, help them out when they need it, because it is life. But then again, if you have people getting tickets and they have expectations, and you've been promoting this, and now it's not coming to, it hurts, because then they're less likely to want to go and support it. And so just kind of balancing that, it can be really difficult. So I think you both have good advice on that, certainly.
Well, and I think our examples definitely speak to one of the risks associated with much larger events, A-list performers. In those situations, it's their contract that you're using, and there's always a force majeure in there. What's called a force majeure, basically giving them an out if something is out of their control. And there's just really nothing you can do about it, and so.
It's the artist's world, and we all just live in it.
Yeah.
When you get to that level, and that's just the simple truth of it. We have, I know you're gonna talk about contracts and that sort of thing at some point here, but they tell us what they're gonna do, and we tell them how it's gonna work when they get here, and there's always a meeting of the mind somewhere, and there's some give and take in that way. But in the end, it's about the artists those days, and making sure that they have what they need to do their job in a way that they feel like they're able to do the best job possible for people who are paying money to see those shows.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. So other than that, some of the examples you just gave, are there any other red flags or things to be cautious about when you're planning? I know you're saying make sure to have a backup plan. Whatever can go wrong can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some other things that we should really be aware of?
Well, that's loaded.
I mean, set a budget and stick to it. I mean, if if you if you start, you know, going past your budget, I mean, that's a red flag. Like, you know, likely you didn't plan well enough, and you maybe need to take some measures to protect yourself. But I mean, it's, yeah, the devil's in the details.
Understanding first what needs to go into the budget, even before that point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have security planned? Do you have porta-johns planned? Is there catering involved? Is there a promoter involved that's going to require a percentage? Are you insured? If something goes wrong, if a stage falls over, if Indiana 2011 taught us anything, it's that at one point in time there are a lot of holes in that coverage. So are you comfortable with your liability exposure on these shows? How much is the act going to cost? How much is the deck and the speakers and the lights and all those production elements that needs to go into a budget? So even before you set a budget, understand what needs to go into the budget, and then once you're comfortable that you know the answers to those questions, then set your budget. Because again, we probably said this 2 or 3 times, the devil's in the details on these things, and if you don't plan as much as possible for the details, you're going to get hung up. It happens.
And I think that brings us into the next section, which is really important, the budget, which is, well, it's a fun part to talk about, money. And that's really the make it or break it point in any event. So what are some of the key considerations we should be making when it comes to the bank accounts, and what other critical budget items planners should have?
Well, your expenses are sometimes limitless. It just seems like, you know, that side of your budget is going to be really, really long, and your revenue side, it's going to be a lot shorter. But I think definitely, you know, one thing that we haven't talked much about is, you know, what sort of revenue streams do you have, and can you leverage? And I think that's definitely a really important one, especially when, of course, looking at your expenses and how much ultimately you want to spend. But you know, again, it depends on the size and scope of your event. Yeah.
I think I don't think people really understand. They say, I want to put on a concert, but they have no concept of what that costs. And so I can't talk artist numbers because there's language in contracts that keeps me from doing that. But just in general terms, I mean, NEBRASKAland Days has a $1.8 million budget for this coming year, and $1 million of that is concerts. That's everything from entertainment to security to staging to other production expenses, sales tax, security, all those sorts of things that go into making sure that for 2 nights we're doing it at a level that is comparable with any outdoor festival in our part of the world. So, you know, the budget, the expense side is enormous. Your revenue streams are ticketing, concessions, sponsorship, and that might be it. And so it's a big apple to try and take a bite out of, and going into it with your eyes as open as possible, I think, is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, and it's, you know, on a smaller scale, this is a much easier pill to swallow. Like
Right.
the budget is not scary, or it doesn't have to be.
No.
And so yeah, there's good news in that.
Yeah.
And that's the point, right? Understand what you want to get accomplished first. Because you can put on a really, really cool localized music show, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg, and really, I think that's where we have opportunities in some of our smaller communities in the state, because it doesn't take a ton of money to pull a stage in and put some lights and some speakers on it and put some really good, and there's some really good acts in our state, really, really good acts that you can buy, and they take really good care of your crowds, and again, it won't cost you an arm and a leg to do that.
Yeah, and I think a big part of the revenue is finding sponsors. I think that would be the biggest help, especially for some of these communities going in wanting to do that. It seems really intimidating looking at NEBRASKAland's budget. I mean, that's not necessarily very realistic for most places, so figuring out how they can have outside support and getting sponsors involved. So what are some of the good methods in approaching them to be a part of that sort of event? What are some creative ways that you can engage with them or get them interested in doing that?
You know, who you know is a really big part of it. You know, if you have a direct personal relationship, or if you know someone who does, that's a great way. And just having a conversation, setting a meeting. You know, if it's, you know, if we're talking smaller events, you know, it's probably walking into, you know, a local shop and asking him to sponsor, either with cash, you know, maybe in exchange for some sort of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Visibility. Visibility, or in kind, you know, like maybe you're going to ask the print shop to print your posters and banners, or maybe you're going to work with a local restaurant who's going to supply the food and the liquor license, perhaps. There's risk there. You want to make sure that you're not, that ideally they're not pulling the liquor license for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally they've done it and they've been successful at it. Yeah, you know, we use for our events a sponsor deck. It's essentially just a good looking packet of information that tells a potential sponsor what the event is, all the pertinent details, and then it outlines what they get depending on you know, what level that they want to contribute at.
Part of developing a good sponsorship program, though, is understanding who you're trying to attract to those shows, to make sure that the demographic of the people that you're going in to visit with about sponsorship revenue aligns within their business model with who you're going to be bringing into the show. You know, find good partnerships in that way. Maybe it's a great in kind is catering. We've even done some of that stuff where you find a local restaurant who's willing to help you out in certain ways, and they get some tickets to the show or maybe some signage. The pitfall is logo soup. I love to call it logo soup, where everybody gives you a couple $100 and you throw logos on until they don't mean anything. In our world, it's access, right? So access to the show, access to hospitality, access to some other benefits, because that in essence is what we're trying to create through our sponsorship package, is experience type stuff for some of our sponsors that make them want to continue being sponsors of NEBRASKAland Days. So, but again, be realistic about what you're trying to ask them for. Businesses today, I'm also a small business owner, businesses today are getting hit 18 times a month to buy something or sponsor something. So be realistic about the ask, and again, allowing yourself enough time ahead of the event so that people can plan for that sort of thing if they want to be involved in it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's very important to know ahead of time and have a plan and to make sure it does match up. And it really is all about the experience. That's why people go and they want to be a part of it. And that kind of, again, moves us into the next segment of talking about artists and talent. So when you're looking at having this sort of event and creating and crafting these experiences, how do you go about finding a good artist? Do you have advice on connecting with talent, whether it be local talent or national talent, and then how do you go about working with them?
You'd be surprised at how many bands at a really high level have their agent's email address on their Facebook page. I mean, so that's a lot of times the first place, you know, I go to, you know, is to their social media page to see if they list it there, and if not, you know, there are other ways. I mean, tweeting at them, asking them if they, you know, if they're interested in playing, if we can get in touch. That's a potential way. You know, but on the local level or regional level, it's probably not going to be too difficult to find that contact information. On a much larger level, and you can speak to this probably a lot better, but there's a service called Polestar. You can subscribe to. It's $600, $700 a year, and it gives you all the information you need.
You know, actually, here in Nebraska was a great resource for us when we were using some Nebraska bands, because those guys are plugged in a way that we're not to that scene. A lot of the great talent that we see in our state, not all of it, we've certainly used some from the western side of the state, but there's some really high-end bands in the eastern part of the state that if you're out in our world, you're just not familiar with, because they're playing local venues in Lincoln and Omaha, and so we don't know about those folks. So here in Nebraska was a great resource. I've done it both ways. I bought talent straight up from the agency, but the way I prefer to do it is with a talent buyer. Those folks kind of act as a filter for a lot of the stuff that you encounter, the detail stuff, the devil in the detail stuff. So we have an agent, we use an agent, we have routing partners that we work with to make sure that we're routing folks in a way that makes sense for them. It helps us on our expense side as well if we can build a couple of days for them back to back to back. So there's all sorts of different ways to take care of that, but I prefer to use a talent buyer for our stuff.
Well, and I mean, when you think about it, an artist agent, their job is to get as much money as possible for their
Bingo.
for their band, and like we said before, you know, relationships are huge. A talent buyer has relationships with these agents. If you know, if you're going in cold, you know, to an agent, they have, you know, no incentive to really give you any sort of discount.
Right.
And so. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, you call the agent directly, whose job it is to get as much money for the act as possible. You're going to get their retail price. Mm-hmm. So there's a retail price, and then there's the price that really well-connected people in the industry pay. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that our talent buyer knows what other places are paying because he has access to data and ticket sales data and all that sort of thing that tells us what the true value of a national level touring act is. And so. You're paying for that service, but it's money well worth it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think too, those relationships are very important, but it does get a little sticky sometimes when you start working with talent buyers and then agents, especially because there's a lot of other revolving things going on with that. So this is where the artists' contracts or agreements come in that I'm hoping you can share about. You know, is that something you create yourself? Is that something you get legal help with or have an attorney do that? What does that normally look like?
On a local level at here in Nebraska, especially early on, we never did any contracts. Everything was, you know, a handshake deal, mm-hmm. if you will. And we rarely ever had any issues with that. You know, local bands. Most of the time, you know, they're just as concerned about their image and their name and their reputation, you know, as an organization or a company, you know, for themselves. And so I think you're likely going to have a good experience. That being said, a contract is never a bad thing. Would definitely not discourage anyone from ever going that route. You know, if you want to get something that's really tight legally binding, an attorney is the way to go. You know, have them draft something that really suits your needs. We did not start that route. You know, really was like something. If you go online and get a you know, some sort of template or something and just edit it yourself to suit your needs. While it may not be foolproof, it can go a long way in you know, making sure an artist is prompt, they have the information that you need. It's sort of like a good organizational tool. Mm-hmm. You know, you have the address of the concert, a lot of things that you would maybe need to think about, like in an advance email. It's just sort of actually all contained in this contract, and it's a kind of a great way to kind of tighten things up. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
We have two forms, right? So there's the one we use for more localized talent, which basically says where the engagement is, when the engagement is, what time the engagement commences, what time we open the doors to the engagement, how much the contract's compensation calls for, what's included in that compensation, if there's any other things that are involved, such as catering, hotel rooms, that sort of thing. And that's a real simple one-page document that we generate where we have a template for. Basically, it's a personal services contract is what it really boils down to. we, Band A, agree to play for X amount of time on this date for this amount of money, and this is what's included. The big national level stuff is, there's the contract and then there's the rider to the contract, which is really where the devil's in the detail stuff is. That's where you've heard stories about only green M&Ms in the bowl. That's where that stuff lives. And so part of what we pay for with our talent agency is they go through these things and just start lining stuff out, right? So they shoot us their contract and rider, we go through it, and we shoot them back a venue rider and say, okay, here's what's included in this, and then you basically hash this stuff out in advance with the touring tour manager or the agency. So it's just really important to work all that stuff out before the artist shows up, because there's nothing more uncomfortable in a conversation day of show between somebody in the band or a tour manager who thinks there's a major disagreement between what your expectation is and what the artist expectation is. And so work that stuff out before they ever get there, because your day will go a lot better from start to finish if that stuff's all written down and understood and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you would definitely want to avoid that. And Aaron, I really like what you said about using it as a planning tool, like you were saying as well, just making sure it does have all the agreements, or the details, and that they're both reviewed and agreed upon. You don't want it to be so intimidating or legally binding that people are, stepping away from that, but still just agreeing to show up and that everything's taken care of in advance, certainly. So this is the next segment I want us to go into and to discuss, but it's marketing, advertising, and social media. This is a big thing today, and it certainly cannot be overlooked. And I'm curious if you would both share some of your tactics or strategies you've had over the years, and what have you found to be the most successful?
Marketing is not a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. You really have to go back to that question of who's your audience, who do you want to come, and really think about how exactly do you reach them, and there's more avenues than ever nowadays. For the Good Living Tour, we really relied on the local communities to reach out to their to the community. They knew best, and that was largely newspaper, posters, word of mouth, radio, stuff like that. We definitely still did more social and digital advertising, but we really trusted our local community partners, and that's what they advised, and we feel that they were right, that definitely worked best. For Lincoln Calling, it was for us, it was all digital. Well, a lot of it was digital. Slipping into people's Instagram timelines and Facebook, Twitter, digital banners, digital pre-roll on YouTube, stuff like that. That we feel really kind of got it out. I mean, there's so many different ways. We also did a lot of guerrilla tactics for Good Living Tour. We actually, it was almost kind of like two different tours. We a month or two out, we would send a team to every community, and they would flyer and poster, and they would just have personal conversations with people, making sure that they knew that the event was coming up in a few months, answer their questions, ask them if they were coming, stuff like that. For Lincoln Calling, we'd sneak into dorms and we'd slip flyers underneath people's doors, and hold competitions. For Good Living Tour, we did like a songwriting competition for high schoolers. If you won, you got to play the stage, in an effort to really try and get young people out and stuff like that. And so, there's really, it's definitely getting creative and thinking outside the box can definitely really help. But at other times, the kind of plain old fashioned word of mouth, posters in the windows can really go a really long way.
it really, and again, this is one of those detailed things when you're planning your budget, but marketing is almost always the responsibility of the host community or venue. That your act will help with some of that stuff in their social media platforms, but it's almost always the venue's responsibility. So you need to plan adequately for that, have a plan for that, because your marketing message is going to be a lot different for Allen Jackson or Alabama than it is for Florida Georgia Line or Kane Brown. And so those we have to adjust on the fly every year, but we've gone much more heavily in the digital world than we did 10 years ago. We continue to shift money from more traditional forms of advertising into the digital world because that's where people are these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked a lot of your examples there, and I think this is a fun way for people to really get creative in a lot of their advertising, you know, other than the traditional word of mouth and getting just things on Facebook. But what's an example of the time that you've been most creative in advertising?
One of the more fun, I think, last year we did, so we do kind of, the Bay does an event every year called Skate Art Music Festival, and we have a mobile mini ramp, and we hooked it up to our truck with a speaker on it, and we put a microphone on it, so the speakers were kind of going both ways in the truck, and we were towing the mini ramp, and we had some skateboarders on it, and we were pouring cold brew out the back of the truck, and we were just driving around campus, just trying to get the word out about Skate Art Music Festival to the college kids, and just trying to make as big of a scene as possible without getting in trouble. And I mean that's an extreme, but I guess that's.
I hired you to do that for NEBRASKAland. That's awesome. A lot of what we do is kind of somewhat dictated or limited by the tour, right? So we get creative in some ways through our partners, and a lot of that is how do I win tickets? I mean, some of our tickets are really coveted. The show we put on sale last week, the pit ticket right in front sold out in 4 minutes. So I have sponsors that have a little of that inventory that are going to contest that and really try and expand our reach in that way through their social media channels. So that's in a lot of cases what we do. But that's a great idea, by the way.
Yeah.
We'll have you guys do that for us. How about
Yeah,
that?
guerrilla marketing is definitely fun, and it can be effective. Another thing that I guess isn't really all that new, but it's definitely becoming more popular. Influencer marketing is something that we've definitely put some effort into. We still need to really fine tune it, but I mean it's getting other people who have social media, digital presence, to basically speak on your, advocate on your behalf. You might hit up Taylor Swift and be like, hey, can you tell everyone that you're excited for NEBRASKAland days?
Yep.
And she'll be like, cool, wire me $100,000 and I'll do it. And so that's essentially what it is. And so,
Toby Keith does a real good job of that. We announced him, so he put out a promotional video on his social channels. We get a lot of traffic off that sort of stuff. So in our world, we do see a lot of that where the artist gets engaged through their social media platform to help push some of their fans towards the shows in the local markets, which is really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. All about the relationships.
It is about the relationship.
Yeah, I guess in a smaller community, I like think about those people who are really active online, who everyone follows. Maybe it's some sort of city official or something like that. But yeah.
Without going all Firefest on it.
Yeah.
Oh.
yeah, that's a good example of influencer marketing,
right.
For sure. That's what blew that up. So.
Yeah. Documentary about that is
Gracious.
interesting to watch. And I know we're getting close on time here. Madison, we maybe have a minute or two for questions.
Okay, sounds good. Just so you know, we did experience a few technical difficulties.
Oh.
So, just so you're aware of that.
Okay.
But we have a few questions. So, this one is from Nebraska City. What is the best way to control attendance, and how do I go about ticketing my attendees?
I mean, the barrier.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like, if you want to control it, like, you need some way to corral them. If it's a ticketed event, that you don't want people, getting in for free. So you got to find some sort of way, snow fencing, something like that. So.
Bike rack, cattle panels, point of entry, point of egress. Depends on how many tickets you want to print, right? So if your goal is to have 500 people at the show, you probably run down to the local printing shop and print tickets that are numbered 1 to 500. If your venue is 13,000 people, you probably have ticketing software to handle that sort of thing. So there's a number of different ways to skin that cat too. But yeah, that's just all about scale.
Yeah, we've used put concerts in. I mean, and this is also kind of important for if you have a liquor license, you got to have fencing. You can't be out in the open, and you've got to have, you know, it's more or less like one point of entry. And so utilizing buildings too is a great way. You know, if you have to quarantine an area for 1,000 people, that's a lot of fencing. If you can cut that in half, that can be a really big help.
All right, and I think we probably one more.
Yep, we can do one more.
So this one's from out in Chadron. We are hosting a community concert and we will have food vendors and activity for kids. What other attractions should the event have?
Well, that's loaded. How many, again, it depends on the scale, right? So how many people, are you talking about having 2,000 to 3,000 people there? Or are you talking about having 500 to 1,000 people there? And then once you decide what your scale is going to be and what your audience is going to be, is it part of a larger community festival? I know they just wrapped up for trade days up there. If it's part of a larger community festival, then yeah, I think having outside food vendors come to your place, maybe a carnival, something like that to go along with that. Are you going to start at 8 o'clock in the morning? You're going to start at 7 o'clock at night? That's a really broad-based question.
Yeah, you know, I've seen events do magicians or you know more kids-based performers in certain places, or you know life-size foosball. Sometimes you can get like the Army to do like an obstacle course or something. Imperial, they do really big bounce houses kind of early in the afternoon. That's a great thing. They do a barbecue cook-off. The city buys all the meat, and so it's free. You get to walk around, get the meat, and you know submit your vote, stuff like that. Life-size Jenga, life-size chess, life-size anything that's normally smaller is fun, I guess. Yeah, there's definitely another place to like really kind of get creative and think outside the box. Reaching out to you know other Nebraska communities who are doing things and ask them these questions is really great. Also, you know, happy to be a resource. I know we didn't get a whole lot of time to answer questions, so happy to also be a resource for ideas and bands and whatnot. So
Yeah, and I can share your information as well at the end of the webinar. So my last question for you both is, do you have any final piece of advice for someone starting out in planning this or just looking to do this down the road?
Build a team, get plenty of, give yourself plenty of time. You know, crowdsource this. You know, talk to people you know who have done it before to make sure you're not forgetting anything and you're minimizing your risk.
Check both his boxes, but the most important one is time, and make sure that you've got adequate time between when you're starting your planning and when the event is actually being proposed. And then again, crowdsourcing is a great way to make sure that you're getting all the information you can to make good decisions that don't get you into a pickle.
Yes, and this has been a great discussion. I want to thank you both very much again for coming out. This has been a lot of fun and learning quite a bit, and I hope all of our attendees have as big of a takeaway as I did from this, and I learned quite a bit. So thank you again, especially driving out from North Platte. And as we're wrapping up here, I have one final piece for today's webinar. And we appreciate all the feedback. And so if you're watching today, please type in this link to your browser, take our survey. This will be up, posted on our website tomorrow and our YouTube page, but feel free to give us your feedback. That's very important to us. We want to know what you're interested in learning, just your key takeaways from this and some of the future topics that you would like to see on our webinars. So you'll just copy that link there. And then once you do put in that link, you will see this page, it'll pop up. And this just kind of previews what you'll see. It'll just say thank you for attending our webinar. And, just to be honest with us, let us know your thoughts, and we will read these and take that into consideration when we're making our next session. So, again, I want to thank all of you for joining today and for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.